Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, thank you so very much for being a listener to the Public Relations Review podcast. I would really appreciate your leaving a review of the podcast. Let me know what you think. To make it easy, you can go directly to the podcast website, and that is publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can go directly to the review page to leave your review. So let me know what you think of the podcast. And again, thank you so very, very much for being a listener.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, Apple has ranked this podcast among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. And recently, FeedSpot listed this podcast as number 13 on its top 70 best public relations podcasts in the United States. So thank you to all of our guests and listeners for your continued support. And if you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review. Question: are today's market research solutions providing the ample data that tells business leaders what they really need to know? Because a lot of the data misses the customer's voice and experience. Businesses miss opportunities to create significant value. My guest today has developed a program that produces rich, actionable insights into the needs and values of an underserved consumer segment, identified core experience drivers, and creates campaigns that continues to exceed expectations, drives conversion, and builds loyalty through better experiences. Now, they say that if you want to create incredible experiences for your employees and your customers, you have to better understand them first, and that begins with listening. So joining me today from Richmond, Virginia is James Warren. He is the CEO and founder of Share More Stories and the SEEQ program. So James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's begin by talking about exactly what is Share More Stories, what do you do, and then we'll get into what is your SEEQ program.
Sure thing. Well, Share More Stories is we call it a human experience insights company. That means we do research into employee experience, customer experience. Sometimes we're doing community voice or stakeholder perspectives. But really the commonality in all of that is our desire to really help our clients understand not just the opinions and beliefs and attitudes of the people that they're trying to serve, either as employees or customers, but really understand their experiences and what's driving them, as you already said. And so that's become a really, really big focus for us. And what we found was our unique methodology of storytelling and AI was perfectly suited for the growing field of employee experience, customer experience work. And so for communication professionals, for leaders, organizational business leaders, brand leaders, it's becoming a new tool in their research toolkit when they really want to go a little bit deeper and understand the why behind people's decisions, behavior, etc.
You know, the first question comes to mind as I listen to you talk about this is, how did you recognize that other companies were making mistakes, at least in their storytelling process? Because, you know, one of the things we said is that storytelling maybe does not allow customers to respond, or you get the feelings or thought from them or what it is they're actually looking for or missing. So how did you discover that difference or that missing component?
Yeah, great question. I think there's two parts of it. One is what we saw happening in the market, and you know, that was somewhat informed by our own core experiences when we were, as we say, on the other side of the table, when we were leading brands or communications departments or large organizations, and what we were missing in the tools and in the research that we were getting from our partners. And then the other piece is what's unique about our method itself. And you referenced it before. It's the SEEQ platform, which is an acronym, SEEQ. It stands for Stories to Engage, Explore, and Question. And so when I started the company over 11 years ago, I've always had a deep belief in the power of stories to help people connect and learn and also about better understanding of themselves. And so for me, what was really unique in the opportunity space was to say, how are we in all of our hyper attention on digital marketing? Everybody was going shorter attention span, shorter content, shorter message. I felt like we were starting to miss the opportunity to connect and engage on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that as a consumer and as an organizational leader, and I also could see that and hear that in some of the company leaders we were talking to, that they were starting to signal, yeah, we need to go a little bit deeper, or we're engaging our employees, but it doesn't seem to be having the desired outcome, or we're seeing maybe a softening of share on our brand in the marketplace, or our message just isn't getting through. And that's because it was such a cluttered marketplace that messages that weren't authentic, weren't really engaging, of course they're going to struggle to get through. So that was kind of the big picture, driver behind starting the company and starting the platform. And then what we saw more specifically when we launched Seek is that, a lot of the current research tools, surveys are great for identifying who, what, when, and where. And focus groups and other qualitative research is really good at going deeper into that and understanding how. But none of those tools really do a great job of explaining why. And I think as a marketer or communications leader or organizational leader, if you really want to make an impact and make a difference in the mindset and in the behaviors of your audiences and your constituents, you got to understand why they do what they do in the first place. If you don't understand why, I think you run the risk of shooting with your eyes closed.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that years ago I was in sales with Xerox. I mean, obviously we didn't go into the depth that you're going in here now, but one of the things that they said at Xerox is if you really want to know what somebody wants, ask them. and they will actually tell you. And I think that's in the beginning where a lot of salespeople miss it. They're selling what their product is, how nice and fuzzy and shiny it's going to be, and how much you're going to like it. But they didn't take the time to ask them if this is what you really want. So I think the car manufacturers have done a great deal of that, and they tell people now that we listen to you, and that's how we design certain things.
Well, Peter, what you're saying is so crucial because, it's like the needs ladder, right? So many companies, they have their product, they understand a little bit about how people use their product, but it's a natural tendency for most of us to want to explain how the product works, to want to explain the features. Some marketers and salespeople realize, no, I really got to sell benefits. Mm-hmm. But even that is still somewhat surface level. That's what we know, that's what we can sell, that's what we can message. But what we're really trying to do is connect those benefits to the needs that those customers and those employees have, because that's when you get real alignment, real satisfaction, is when, hey, it's not just I see this product has a benefit, it's this benefit meets my needs.
Right.
And I think that's where sometimes we miss going that extra step. And I think that's largely because the tools we've had don't do a great job of helping us understand people's needs. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where Seek is starting to gain some relevance and traction. And that's what I care about. As a leader, I really want to help people meet needs. I don't just want to, we don't need more products that don't do anything. We need products that solve problems. Mm-hmm. We need things that make people's lives better. We need things that increase impact. And so that's the mission, to be honest with you, is really helping companies and company leaders deliver greater impact. And that starts with understanding those needs.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Marketing is a puzzle. You can either give into the confusion or learn to love the solve. On the Axiom's Real Talk About Marketing podcast, guests like Aaron Schaefer of GM share how to manage challenges.
Make sure that you're not fixed in terms of what you're thinking about. The team's going to change. The way teams operate are going to change. COVID was a great example of that. The industry is going to change. Are cookies going away or not? That was another great example of that. And so how do you continue to evolve as the space evolves?
Guests from HP, The Trade Desk, and Databricks share thoughts on today's marketing landscape. Find Real Talk About Marketing on YouTube, Axiom.com, or wherever you hear podcasts.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more then about your SEEQ program. Exactly how does it drill down, if you will, to find out exactly about what the needs are, how important they are, and that sort of information. Give us an overview of how that actually works.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go with our shorthand version. We just call it seek.
Okay.
And when I talk about seek, it really starts with what's the question, that you want to ask. Like you said, if you want to know what people think, ask them.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about that as being a prompt, a storytelling prompt. And it's in our platform. It's a web-based app that you set up a project that's focused on what you want to learn more about. Now, here's where one of the first big distinctions comes in from. Because most of the time, executives and leaders are really focused on asking questions that kind of validate what they know. You know what I mean? Like we say things and ask things that are, even if there's a little bit of we want to learn something, it's very rooted and grounded in what we want to know more about. What Seek does is kind of flip the script and say, there are people out there who, if you ask them to tell you what they're really thinking and what they're really feeling, they will. But you got to ask them, and you got to make it easy for them to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not a 30 or 50-point questionnaire. It's probably a way that they can express themselves, where they feel open and free to say what's really on their minds. And so that's the premise behind doing it as a personal story. And so we might write a prompt around, if we're working with a travel brand, to that company's either hotels or airline or destination, or it might be more general. It might say, tell me about your most memorable travel experience. And so consumers of that brand and even their competitors will come into the platform and they will respond to that prompt with a written story. We're adding other means like voice and video, but you'd be surprised at how much people's approach to sharing their story shifts when they start worrying about what they look like on camera. So we focus on the written story and voice because it's a lot easier to just have them focus on their experience. But we ask them things like, what do you remember tasting or smelling or touching or hearing? Because the senses really help them recall their story and their experience with a lot more detail. So after they write it, they submit it to the platform. They might answer just a few questions about their experience. And then the participant's job is done. That like if we were doing the research, then they'd be done. On the back end, what we're doing is we turn each of those stories into emotional data. So we measure 55 different emotions, needs, values, attitudes, all different ways that help you paint sort of an emotional map. So now you not only are hearing what people are experiencing, they're telling you why it matters to them, and we're showing you how it makes them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly for folks who are, say, communicators, right? This is like gold, because now I can really tune my messaging to the tone, to the attitude, to even be like, how do I hit this emotion? If that's the emotion I want to achieve, these folks are loving their experience and this is what those emotions look like. Well, I want to match that. I want to meet them where they're at. And if these are folks who are struggling in their experience with our brand, well, I need to move them from where they're at to this more positive place. What does my language need to say? What does it need to feel like? What does the message or the product experience need to deliver? So it becomes really a powerful toolkit in the hands of a leader or a decision maker or a communicator, in addition to all the other things we give we talk a lot about how do you take action on this? How do you engage this audience or this constituent, these employees and so forth? And often what it really points back is, what do you need to do differently as a leader to be successful in engaging these employees or these customers or these stakeholders? So that's how the Seek platform works. In a nutshell, we call it engage, analyze, and act, because the first act of the leader saying, I want to hear your stories and active engagement. And then the analysis is what happens in the platform. And then the action is what the leader is able to do with the insights that we've delivered them.
Not too long ago, I spoke to another person, and they had come up with a unique way of getting supporters, and that was turning actual customers into supporters. So because, rather than hiring spokespeople or influencers, why not get people who actually use the product or service because, they're much more authentic as compared to paying somebody to say what you want them to say. There's a huge difference there. Have you considered anything similar to that?
That's not necessarily our focus, but that is definitely one of the uses that has come out of this platform. We do a lot of work in travel and tourism. We do some in financial services. We do some in energy and utility. We also do some in health and wellness, right? Large industries that frankly are pretty mature, and in some cases there's a lot of opportunity to make things better. And one of those things is when you deliver a great experience, how do you help that customer or employee become an ambassador or a spokesperson for the brand? And so sometimes one of our customers in travel, they asked us if we would ask participants for their permission to share their stories. And we have to kind of walk a fine line there, because we want participants to feel like the platform is highly trustworthy, private. They can be anonymous after they register, so their data is confidential. So we really save that question till the end, and we ask them, hey, are you willing to to hear from so-and-so company about your experience? Can they contact you? Or would you be willing to give them permission to share your story in communications? And that's as far as we go. And if they say yes, then we're able to put participants who raise their hand in touch with the client. And we've seen some of our clients turn that into really, really actionable marketing and sort of storytelling. One of those was Virginia's for Lovers. They did that very thing where they did the research over several waves to understand critical travel experiences among Black travelers and other travelers who were often underrepresented, not only in the marketing, but even in like the travel experience. And after learning deeply about those experiences, they didn't necessarily take those exact stories, but they revamped the whole messaging direction for the brand, for those audiences. Mm-hmm. And they developed a campaign that was focused specifically on letting Black travelers tell their stories on the company's Instagram page. The campaign took off, blew up, and won some awards, met all their business objectives, and really increased Black travel and visitation into Virginia as a result.
Mm-hmm. That brings up another question. And I think about, perhaps the most difficult problem you had, let's say in terms of maybe storytelling or getting people to say what it is that they really wanted from this product or service. What perhaps was your most difficult one, and how did you go about resolving that?
That's a great question. One of the ones, we've had a few that were challenging, either in terms of like the project execution or what the client was trying to learn was a very hard or specific question. I'll tell you one, and then maybe another if we have time. But one I remember is before we had the web-based platform, the Seek platform, we were doing Seek primarily in person, like workshops. So COVID, we started doing those sessions online. But we had one where we were traveling to a client's sites, plants, offices around the country. We were doing, I think, a total of 10 sessions with 10 to 20 people each. So, a very large kind of qualitative research effort, if you will. And we walked into one place in really a rural part of the country, big manufacturing facility, and walked in to conduct the Seek session. And, we have a kind of a facilitation approach, right? It's a workshop. So, you want to get people warmed up. You want to tell them what you're going to do. You want to walk them through the exercises, all of that. Well, we were doing the workshop in a manufacturing plant, mm-hmm. right? So that particular day, we were going to talk to mainly manufacturing employees. And they start streaming in at the end of their shift. And so the first thing I was thinking is, man, getting folks at the end of their shift, I wonder how that's going to work, because they probably want to go home, and I don't know if they really want to be here. And one guy comes in, and we had at that time, very basic version of Seek. It was a website, but it was very basic. It wasn't nowhere near as robust as it is today. And we, kind of guide people through how to use it. So he comes in and sits down in the back of the room and just jumps on the computer and starts typing. And so at first I was like, I wonder if he's doing other stuff. Then I was like, well, he's not really engaged in the workshop. So this is like awkward, because I'm trying to facilitate. He's not even participating. He's just back there just typing away. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? So finally I was like, he's like, no, I started writing. And I was like, well, okay, but we haven't even gotten to that part yet. He's like, no, I'm good. And I'm thinking, but we haven't told him exactly what we're doing or why. And he came in and he told me afterward, he got up about halfway through the workshop. He's like, all right, I'm done. I'm heading out. And I'm thinking, wow, that's not cool. He didn't really want to participate. And then I look, he came up and he said, I got it out. I did what I needed to do. I understood it. I just got to go pick up my kids. And I was like, okay. I looked at the man's story afterwards. He had sat down in an hour and written almost 2,000 words. Mm. he was on a mission. He had so much he needed to say that he wanted to get out that he had never been able to say in all of his years working in that company. And while that was hard, because some of the things we heard in those stories and in other stories are really, really difficult and painful, and you have to have you have to have empathy, and you also have to put on your sort of researcher's mind so you can analyze with empathy. That one was tough because it sort of stressed me in a sense that I was like, what are we doing here? But then on the flip side, the learning was extraordinary. And in fact, it changed how we started facilitating workshops after that, both because of COVID and because of that person's experience. It was so rich and deep, and it really stuck with me. So that was one. I've got others for sure, but that's definitely one that was just challenging, but ultimately really, really insightful and beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all know that storytelling is an important part of public relations in terms of getting people to buy in and understand what the product and or services are, and we're addressing your needs. How about talking briefly about what might be missing in most storytelling that PR people might be missing when they're trying to convince others that this is what we really do here?
Yeah, I think it's voice of employee, voice of customer. I think so often, when we're developing the communications or the messaging, or you're delivering it, you're the PR person, you're the corporate comms person, I think so often we develop our communication strategy and our messaging from the perspective of this is the company's positions, this is the brand, this is the story we're trying to tell, and therefore this is what our messaging looks like coming out of that. And all of that makes logical sense. But if we haven't, in that process, centered the voice of, if it's marketplace driven, centered the voice of the customer, then I would even question the brand strategy in the first place, because brand strategies that don't really, really resonate the voice of the customer, especially if they're new or they're a shift or it's a legacy brand that you're reinventing, it's really hard to tell that story in a way that says to people, this is relevant to me, this makes sense to me, you seem to know me. Otherwise, it comes across as like the brand is somebody who's distant, not related to me, doesn't understand, and is just talking at me. So the voice of the customer in the messaging, in the story or the narrative, is so huge for making that brand come across as authentic, but also aspirational. If the company's navigating crisis, to be able to say, look, we've engaged our community and our stakeholders, and not just here's what they told us, but reflecting those learnings in the messaging, in the key talking points, in the storytelling. You don't even have to say, this is what they told us. You just say it. And it has the impact of really drawing people in, because it has the ring of truth. And they say, oh, I could totally relate to that, because you're actually talking to them in the way that people are talking about their own experiences. And so that's what when our client is a communications focused client, or their desired outcome is to take these insights and these stories and help them develop a better communication strategy, a better PR strategy. That's where we really try to help them focus in on is, what's the missing part of this? Whose story are you telling? Whose story do you need to be telling? And how do you tell it in a way that really amplifies and resonates the voices of your target audience? That's what will shorten the distance between them hearing and responding to that message.
Well, let me say this, James. I mean, this has been very, very enlightening, and I'm sure that our listeners will fully appreciate exactly what it is you do and how you go about it, and maybe try to transfer some of these techniques, if you will, over to what it is that they do. And as a matter of fact, if you want to get in touch with James, as I said, he is the CEO and founder of Share More Stories, and the founder of the SEEQ program, have been our special guest today. Any closing remarks you might have for the audience?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to share some of what we've learned with your listeners and your audience. I really appreciate that. And, I would just say to anybody who is listening, if you want to make a bigger impact in your organization, in your marketplace, in your community, it really does start with listening. Whether you're using these types of tools or not, everything we're talking about is really about one human interacting with another human in a much deeper, more authentic way. And start there, and I guarantee you'll see better results.
Well, James, once again, thank you so much. My guest today has been James Warren. He is the CEO and founder of Share More Stories and the creator of the SEEQ program. If you have more questions, just look James up and give him a ring, and I'm sure things will go well. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we'd certainly like to get a review from you. And also, don't forget to tell your friends about the Public Relations Review podcast. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next edition.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.